My good friend from Texas, Mr. Moran, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the witnesses for being here today to share your testimony. Thank you in particular for putting national security policy and foreign affairs policy ahead of politics. I appreciate that. Your commitment to improving our future behavior by evaluating our past decisions is underscored by your presence here and the testimony you've given, and I deeply appreciate that. Colonel Crumrick, I want to start with you. You mentioned that in your testimony that the administration's timing and, quote, selective intelligence blindness were two of the three fundamental flaws that directly threaten the military plan and mission execution. That was from your testimony. I'd like to know, in your opinion, what is one of the most grievous or egregious examples of, quote, selective intelligence blindness attributable to the Biden administration during the Afghan withdrawal process?
There's a number to choose from. I think the key piece is when you have over 100 years of experience between those three four-star generals, and they're telling you, based on all of this experience, that we need to hold off on the withdrawal until the conditions are met. And these are the reasons why, operationally and based on the entire intelligence community telling you that this needs to follow the conditions. When that was not followed and the decision was to go to this diplomatic island in Kabul, at that point it was the biggest mistake made by the administration. They should have listened to those that had been living it, those that had to endure the losses there. And failure to do so was catastrophic.
And the reason why we put those conditions in such agreements is because if they're not followed, then the obligation for our activity then goes away. It's a basic principle of law in any contract. There's conditions preceding. If those are not fulfilled, then the other party does not have to fulfill its commitment or obligations. And in this case, you're saying we just ignored the fact that they didn't fulfill their conditions preceding. Is that true?
That is correct. Well, that is correct.
You also said it's well known that between May and October is Afghanistan fighting season and the Taliban are at their strongest. In the strategic plans for withdrawal that were offered to the administration, was this a well-known reality related to the administration?
Absolutely. There's 20 years of experience, the Afghan fighting season. Everyone was aware of it.
But it seems like in their execution of plans, they ignored that reality. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
How high would you rank timing as a means for a successful mission when considering the Taliban's season of aggression that was well known for decades?
It's extremely important. Some people focus on courses of action, but I would always argue that the timing of your operation absolutely matters just as much.
One more question for you, and then I'll move over the dais. But to the best of your knowledge, what agreements, if any, did the U.S. make with the Taliban after Kabul fell?
I am not privy to that answer.
Does anybody at the dais have an answer to that question? Colonel Kalinda, do you know as well? Or
I do not.
And Sergeant Major?
I do not either.
All right. Colonel Kalinda, I want to come to you and thank you for your testimony. You got about a minute and a half, but I want to give you just the opportunity to talk about anything that you've not been able to emphasize today that we need to take away as a lesson from this botched withdrawal as to what we need to do differently in the future. What lessons can we learn that we haven't discussed today?
We need to take a yes and approach to these disasters. We need to, of course, look at the immediate disaster of the withdrawal and evacuation. Also, what got us there, because if we don't, we're going to wind up in another war that ends up in disaster. So I offered three of the immediate causes of the collapse, and these rhyme across Vietnam and Afghanistan. I mean, the first one is the Afghan government never bothered to gain the buy-in of the Afghan people. As Colonel Crumrick said, they became a predatory kleptocracy, government of thieves, where positions were for sale for exorbitant amounts of money. A police chief in a big province might go for as much as $3 million US. And in exchange for that, buying their position, they were able to use the position to make the money back through land theft, kidnapping for ransom, extorting our aid and development dollars, et cetera. And all these actions pushed Afghans into the arms of insurgents who were targeting and killing our soldiers. A second major reason is that, as Colonel Krumrich said, the Taliban were much more innovative. We got very complacent over 20 years, believing, we in the Afghan government believing that we could do the same thing over and over again and expect similar results. But when the Taliban are innovating militarily, politically, diplomatically, eventually by the summer of 2021, they had the upper hand. And sadly, many Afghans saw the Taliban as the lesser of two evils. And third and finally is we have got to create some sort of doctrine that helps us build developing world militaries much more effectively. We can't afford to make them in our own image and likeness. It doesn't work. There are other models that would have made the Afghan military more sustainable, able to stand on its own and not simply collapse like a house of cards. That's our fault, and we should fix that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much. And myself and the ranking member are just agreeing on the fact that you're right. We can't continue to model everything as if it's the U.S. model and then expect that to go forward. So thank you for that. That was a great layout. And you're right. Military doctrine drives it. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the witnesses. Thank you for your service. As I listen to not just to the testimony, but the people asking the questions, a lot of us have served overseas. A lot of us have a lot of joint service. So, right around here, I'm looking at Air Force, Navy, Marine, Army, literally right in a row. People are your brothers in arms, asking you questions, understanding that you guys were there and you did that, and we appreciate your service and appreciate your testimony today. A lot of us, when we talk about the withdrawal, for example, when I remember when the withdrawal was happening, it's probably one of the worst adult experiences I've had in my life. That may sound over dramatic. I wasn't even there. But yet anybody who served and understands the people we've lost, the friends we visited, the grave sites, the time we spent away from our family, the months and years even that we spent away from our families, all of us, the traumatic brain injuries, the limbs lost, 2,461 deaths, trillions of dollars, 20 years of investment to give it back to the people who now are harboring, I think, 27 bases that are training terrorists now. That hurts, and I'm not over yet, and I don't think any of us are. And so when I hear people talk about, well, we just need to learn lessons, you're right. We do need to learn lessons, and that's what this is about. You've already talked, Colonel, I really appreciate you talking about some of the different things that we've made mistakes on, the timing, the manning, the location, all of the witnesses have talked about. One of the things that we haven't really totally addressed, in my opinion, was the command climate, and this goes all the way to the top. I'm an ER doctor. I'm also a military pilot, military ER doctor, as a matter of fact. Both in the ER and in the cockpit, when things start going wrong, I've empowered everybody in the room to stop me. I don't like to land here. I don't feel comfortable. There's something wrong with this, the way we're approaching. There's something wrong with the way we're doing our mission. In ER, if I'm given the wrong drug or given the wrong command, anybody in the room can question me at the time. That's a command climate, which keeps me from making mistakes. The question is, as you commanders or boots on the ground were executing the mission as you saw it, but you were giving feedback, I assume in the same command climate, I don't feel comfortable with this. Do you feel like you were empowered and had been heard and acknowledged in your concerns? I'll start with the colonels.
Within the military structure and the plan, there was a lot of transparency on the options that we presented and then the directive that and the orders that we received that we needed to execute. As I had remarked earlier, there was some shock. There's a lot of shock. There was some cynicism because a lot of us had a really bad feeling of what was going to happen. However, I will say that the military leaders, General McKenzie, General Milley, they do what we do in the military. They followed orders. They did the best that they could with this, and we executed the best that we had the ability to do it. And there were some tough days. You know, having to watch Sean McKenzie get on TV and talk about Abbey Gate was really, really difficult. And he had a serious burden to carry on his shoulders. And I think what gets you through that is knowing that we're doing the best that we can in the military. We executed the best that we could, but the pill that is impossible to swallow is that it was all wrapped up and washed away with failure to include all the hope for the Afghanis.
100%. When you are in charge, you have got to listen to feedback from people, and your subordinates have to believe that, have to have the psychological confidence that they can go to you and they can say, boss, I think this is wrong, and here's the reasons why, here's what I think we ought to do instead. I'm not privy to the inner workings of those conversations in this particular incident. I do know that historically, it's a good thing that Lincoln didn't listen to McClellan, for instance. FDR disagreed with Marshall about going to, Marshall wanted to go right into France in 1942, and FDR said, no, we're going to go into North Africa. Truman disagreed with MacArthur about the atomic bomb. So it's not unusual for leaders to take all that in because they have to look at a wider aperture and maybe make an unpopular decision. So I'm just speaking historically. I'm not.
So let's get into that real quick, if I may, because we're running short on time. But it's interesting. You're right. And when we make the right decision, we're all hailed for it.
Right.
But when we make the wrong decision, the only way to learn from it is to say, I made the wrong decision. The problem is, in this case, and Command Sergeant Major, I know that you would look at the board, your command structure, all the way to the very top. Who's at the top of your chain of command?
That's the President of the United States, sir.
President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief. Now, we can say when McClellan and Lincoln disagreed. We can say when Ike or anybody else disagreed. We can talk about when generals are relieved. And we can learn from those lessons. But we cannot learn from a lesson when it's an abject failure and no admission of any mistakes. We talk about learning when my friends across the aisle say we just need to learn from this. We need to stop playing politics with it. But we cannot learn if we do not admit mistakes. And that's the problem I'm talking about, the command climate. I can't learn if my patient dies on the table and nobody can tell me that I did anything wrong in the ER. I can't learn, certainly, if I crash my helicopter and anybody dies from my mistake. In this case, I feel like we crashed and learned nothing because we can't even admit the mistakes that we made from the very top. And that's my concern, because if we're going to go into this, look, we even have a problem right now. We continue policy, and we don't talk about this very much, but we're continuing to spend billions of dollars. Now, this doesn't have to do with the withdrawal directly, but this has to do with what's happening right now. The American people need to know. The Afghan Fund, which is basically subsequently been transferred $3.5 billion in seized assets from the fund with the purpose of stabilizing the Afghan central banking system. Of course, the Taliban basically takes that and uses it for whatever they want to. We're supporting a terrorist organization, essentially, in the idea that we're doing something right. This is continued failed policy because we haven't learned from our mistakes. This is what drives me crazy. We have a command climate inside of our own government that doesn't listen to our military leaders who know what they're doing, doesn't listen to Congress or anybody else because they think they know best, and they continue to screw it up. That's a bad command climate. I don't care if we're talking politics or military or anything else. And that's what we have to learn from. That's what we're here for today. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield.
Now I recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for your service. Thanks for coming. I'm over here. Look, I will tell you, I still haven't gotten over the withdrawal from Iraq and the 4,500 plus lives lost there for what seems to be nothing, and what to say to those families. Of course, Afghanistan's right up there, and you know, I was around watching as a young man or a young boy the Huey leaving the top of the embassy in Hanoi. And I remember the rhetoric this time where it was not going to be like that. It was not going to be like leaving Vietnam. We weren't going to see that scene, and we didn't see that scene, right? It was a Chinook flying with the mountains in the background, or a C-17 with Afghans hanging off the bottom of it and falling to their death. It is unimaginable to people like me, and I imagine to folks like you who wore the uniform. And, you know, look, we all know the mantra. Ours is not to question why. Ours is just to do and die, and we get that, right? We all get that. We signed up for that. But at the same time, the American people demand accountability for their for the blood that's lost, for their family members that are never coming back, for the equipping of the largest terrorist organization on the planet at the heel of the American taxpayer. And so we got to do our job here. We understand that you're carrying out orders and they're imperfect and you don't know what the answer is. And policymakers sometimes don't know what the answer is. We get that, right? Nobody's perfect. We all fall short of the grace of God. But when we make mistakes, we've got to learn from them so we don't continue the same failed policy. It is our job to get accountability, not just to assign blame, but so that we don't make the same dumb mistakes again, because lives are precious. And nobody's going to join the service, nobody's going to join uniform service if they know that no one here gives a damn whether they live or die. Right? We all love our country. We all want to do the right things. Sergeant Major, I'm just so, and I was at the time, and I still remain concerned about using HKIA as opposed to Bagram, Bagram. Was there a pre-existing backup plan? Do you know, or was it always that plan? And I know that you had to collapse, but still stay operable. But you couldn't collapse to the extent that you had to and stay operable. Plus, you're also required to secure the embassy, which is not on the same location, knowing that you didn't have the forces available to secure both or probably either one. Was there a plan?
Sir, there was a pre-existing NEO plan. That NEO plan, I'm not sure when it was penned exactly. I want to say it was around 2012. But in that plan, the plan was to conduct a NEO out of Bagram.
And when was it to be? Was it just a backup that there was going to be a choice of either location, or was it we're going to use this one, and if this one fails, we're going to go to that one? Do you know what was the determining factor of which one to use? Because everything was set up for Bagram, but nothing was set up for HKIA.
Sir, the plan for Bagram, being it was written in 2012. We couldn't predict what was going to happen in the future.
Right. The enemy always gets a vote, right? No plan survives first contact.
Correct. So what the exact triggers were in that plan, it never, from my recollection of that plan, it was about an 800-page document. I do not recall what the triggers specifically were to launch a NEO. Well,
it just seems... Look, none of us here want a Monday morning quarterback, especially if you weren't there, even those of us who have worn the uniform. But in retrospect, well, as it was happening, all of us, I think, that have worn the uniform were scratching our heads, saying that was the hard point. That was the place where we were most prepared to make a stand and to evacuate from. That's where we were operating out of. That's where everything was located. That's where we're familiar. Why in the hell did we not do that? And look, there was a lot of lives lost. We don't want to focus solely on the ones that were lost in the final days when it seems like it's for nothing absolutely, because every single one of them is precious. In my remaining time, Mr. Crumrick, I think you mentioned the concept of selective intelligence and the issues that it posed on the mission. What, if you know now, after the fact, what was not mentioned? What was, if you know, exactly ignored through the selective intelligence blindness? And what can we learn from that?
The plan that was ordered to the military to execute goes back to the first objective of the withdrawal and the post-withdrawal, which was having that diplomatic base set in Kabul. And that looked like the embassy and then about the 4 miles over to HKIA. The problem with that is it ignored all of the Taliban threat, which we have described here today, of which had only been getting steadily more refined and more dangerous over 20 years. And so when you pick that plan, but you choose to not acknowledge or protect against this red storm that's coming, it just leaves you flabbergasted of how did you think this was going to go?
And my time's expired, and there are good people that have been waiting to ask a question. I just got to follow up with one quick one based on that, because that's what everyone else sees. Why? Why did we just ignore? And why and who? Who made the decision to ignore, if you can pinpoint it? And look, we can't ascribe motives, but what do you pretend, or what do you suppose is the motive to ignore it?
I was not in the room. I know what was recommended as the course of action, and I know what was given back to us to execute. And what was given back to us to execute was not what we recommended. So someone above the 4-star level is the one who made the decision to do it. Ultimately, it resides with the president. So somewhere in there would be the person that you're trying to identify.
Roger, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. We're now going